I've just finished knitting this jumper last week and I've already got a few questions about it, so I thought I may as well just sit down and talk through the yarn that I used, the pattern I followed and the modifications I made to it, and how I'm feeling about the finished object. The pattern that I followed for this jumper is from Sandnes Garn and it's called the Nord sweater. I found this one on Ravelry and it didn't really have many projects. I think it has 8 or 9 and I really loved the design. So originally when I saw a sweater in this kind of colour scheme, it was Petite Knit's Celeste sweater. But I didn't love the geometric design, so I was looking for alternatives, and when I saw this one I was like, this is the one I want to knit, and even better, it's free. So I clicked over to the Sandnes Garn website, and they have the pattern in both Norwegian and English, and I don't speak Norwegian, so I downloaded the English version, and the first thing I noticed when I scrolled through was that they have the colourwork chart, but it was really, really blurry in the English version. Something went wrong with their PDF compression, I think. The file is really, really small. So I ended up having to also download the Norwegian version and just scroll to the same chart, and they have the full size colour chart in the Norwegian version with no issues. But you just have to translate the words on there. But all it's talking about is like the main colour versus the secondary colour, so, and then the number of stitches. So it's really easy to figure out what's going on. But otherwise, the English pattern was really good. It's kind of a classic Scandinavian pattern in the sense that they don't really hold your hand. It's quite short from memory. I think it's only about 1.5 pages of pattern. And they give you a little brief explanation of how to do the stitches or how they suggest doing it, but then they kind of leave you to your own devices. So a classic example is, you know, increase 40 stitches evenly over 130 stitches. And they don't tell you exactly what to do there, and they don't tell you exactly the kind of increase you must do. I actually really like that style of pattern. I don't follow patterns all the time, so I find that when they're a little bit more concise like that, I just find it a bit easier, but I know that some people prefer to have a bit more specificity, so just thought I'd mention that. So this jumper has been knit with some yarn that I got secondhand. As you can see, it's got a lot of colours involved, and there's 2 different types of yarn in here. So the main body of the jumper, which is this purpley grey colour, is Clackheaton Australian Superfine Merino 8 ply, which is the equivalent of DK weight. It's a superwash merino, and this is in the colour silver, I believe. And then the feature portion of the sweater is knit in 4 different shades of patterned Dreamtime merino. And this is actually 4 ply, which is fingering weight, and I've held it double. So the colours in here are, we have pale blue, gold amber, moccasin and cream. This yarn's also a superwash merino. In comparing the two, I think that the Clackheaton Superfine is a little more traditional superwash. It's really stretchy and soft, whereas the Dreamtime merino, it is super soft, but it's not quite the same as the main body. But they actually go together really well, I thought, in the end. The major distinction I noticed was that the Clackheaton actually has quite a lot of twist. So when it's all knit up, it almost looks like twisted stitches. So one leg of the stitch is kind of straight up and down, and the other one is... Sorry, the camera just died. Okay, I'm back. So yeah, as I was saying, I was really happy with these yarns. I think they're really soft, and you know, they're super wash. I haven't been brave enough to properly wash it yet, but I've had absolutely no issues with felting in the spin dry process that I used when I blocked it. So these 4 colourwork colours that I picked were actually just scraps that I picked up secondhand. So I'm really happy that I was able to use just a small amount of each one, and I only have a little bit left over, so I'm probably going to make some sort of winter accessory like gloves out of it. So when it comes to modifications, I did modify it. I can't help myself. I modify basically everything that I knit. So I took some notes on Ravelry. The major thing that I did was, this is a top-down knit, and I wasn't sure how much yarn I'd have left for the ribbing, and I didn't know what kind of collar I wanted. So I actually, instead of casting on at the top, I cast on just beneath the ribbing, and also 1 additional row in, because the first row is a full set of increases. So I did a provisional crochet cast on at that stage with that number of stitches. And then when I went back, I just had to do the final round of decreases upwards and then the ribbing. So I started just before the colour work. Then there are short rows in the back. So I did those in the main colour, and then I went on to the chart. I found it really, really addictive and fun. It went super, super fast. I don't know, it was awesome. It does have, in some places, 3 colours at once, which was really tricky. And I still haven't quite got the hang of using both of my hands to knit colour work at the same time yet. So I was just using one hand for all of them. And keeping track of all of those balls of yarn, especially because I was holding the yarn double, meant that at different stages I had 6+ balls of yarn at once, and they kept getting tangled. It was driving me crazy. But other than that, the colour work section was so fun. I love the way the pattern looks. When I had knit just this section, I was a little nervous that they looked like eggs, like hard-boiled eggs. But as I kept going and I kept adding more of the yellow colour, I think that got less and less noticeable, and I'm really happy with it now. I love the colours that I chose in terms of how low contrast they are, and I think overall they provide a really nice kind of colour scheme. Anyway, so after I followed the colour work chart to the T, I continued on. So in the colour work chart, it's a circular yoke. But then beyond the colour work chart is raglan increases, which I think is pretty typical. And for my size, which I knit, which was the smallest size in the pattern, which is extra small, it suggested that you do 8 raglan increase rounds, so 16 total rounds. And I actually only did 2, so I deliberately cut it smaller because the suggested ease in the extra small size I think was still going to be too much for me. I didn't want an oversized jumper, and I only had a certain amount of this secondhand yarn. So yeah, I cut the raglan increases short, and then in the pattern, after you're done with the raglan increases, it suggests that you knit, it's either 2 centimeters or 2 inches additionally straight. I didn't do that either, so I just went straight from the 2 raglan increase rounds into the underarms. And I also increased a couple less stitches in the underarm than it suggested to make it, again, just a little bit tighter. I'm really, really happy with the ease that I ended up with. It's just like ever so slightly larger than me, so maybe like 1 or 2 inches of ease, which was perfect. So then I went on to the body in the main colour. I did make a modification in the body. It's suggested that you knit straight, but I wanted to try my hand at some waist shaping. I did some waist shaping in my first ever jumper with absolutely no rhyme or reason, and I did it way too steep. So I was doing something like decreasing at 4 points every other round or something. So I ended up with like a batwing or dolman style cut. And so I wanted to try again and actually use some maths. So I figured out the difference between my bust, my waist and my hips. And there's just a couple of inches. And so I figured out how many stitches I'd want to decrease just to cut out a couple of inches worth. So I ended up doing the decreases from here at 4 points. So there's, it's like princess seam style. So there's one here, and then there's the same on the back. And I did them 3 times, and they were spaced 12 rows apart. And in total, that means that I reduced 12 stitches, which at my gauge of about 24 stitches per 4 inches was about 2 inches of waist shaping. For the decreases, I used a, it's called like a left slip, I'm going to look it up. It's called a slip twist turn decrease. It's basically kind of a slip knit, but there's an additional twist in there to make it less noticeable. I do think it is less noticeable than this SSK, but I think it's still pretty visible. I really hope that they'd be more invisible than this, especially because there's so few of them. I feel like it's really noticeable amongst all this stockinette. And on this side I just did knit 2 together. And the same on the back. So I am really happy with the shaping. So I did 3 sets of decreases, and then I believe I did 2 increases towards the hips, but they were spaced only 9 rounds apart. So it's kind of a gradual decrease and then a slightly more steep increase. Yeah, I'm really happy with the shaping. I just wish that the decreases were less visible. But so after I knit the body, I kind of was able to figure out how much yarn I had left, and I realized that I did not have anywhere near enough of the main color to do the full length sleeves that are in the pattern. I didn't even have enough to do all of the ribbing in the main color, which was my original vision. But I did have quite a lot of the yellow contrast color. I actually already owned some, and then I came across more in this second-hand collection that I bought. So I was able to dip into my original stash and use it to do the ribbing at the bottom of the hem. And then I was able to use what I had left of the main color to pick back up around the sleeves. And I knit just an additional inch on the sleeves and then moved on to the ribbing. It's 1x1 rib. It's all about 1.5 inches on all the edges. I'm really happy with the sleeves. They're like a little bit between a cap sleeve and a short sleeve. I think they look really nice. I don't own any short sleeve jumpers, but I think it's going to be really practical in the autumn and springtime when I don't really want to be wearing just like a t-shirt or a blouse, but it's too hot to wear a full sweater. So after I did all that, I was able to pick up the provisional cast on, and this is the first time I successfully picked up a cast on without having to like manually unpick each of the stitches. I don't know what I did wrong last time I did a provisional cast on, but I didn't do it this time, so I'm really happy about that. I picked up all the way around the neckline. I knit that original decrease round that I didn't do when I skipped the ribbing the first time, and then I switched over to the contrast color and my smaller needles, and I knit about 1.5 inches for the neckline. I think I might have done just like a tiny bit extra. I'm so pleased with how the neckline fit is. It's like my dream size neckline. So I've made a note of how many stitches. I think I got down to about 90 stitches when I switched to the ribbing. So now I kind of know at this gauge with these needles, which were 4mm for the colour work, 3.5mm for the main body, and 2.5mm for the ribbing. I know that 90 stitches is like perfect for my neckline. It doesn't feel like it's tricking me. But it's definitely not flaring out, and this has already been blocked, so this is kind of as stretched as it'll get. Speaking of blocking, when I finished this sweater, it was actually way tighter, and I kind of liked it. It was like a little cropped tee, and so I went to block it, and when I did that, it stretched so much, which I knew it was going to do because all superwash yarn does stretch, but I was really surprised. So I actually measured it just before I blocked it and after I blocked it. So originally from collar to hem, it was 16 inches. And I was expecting it to grow maybe to 18 inches. But I didn't even stretch it when I was blocking it. And I measured it again and it was 20.5 inches. So before I blocked it, the jumper kind of came just beneath my belly button. So it was between my waist and my hips. And now it sits right on my hip bones, which to me is perfect. I wouldn't call it a cropped sweater. It's pretty much a full length sweater for me, but I do have a short torso and long legs. But I don't have to tuck it in at all because it doesn't like go too long. I find sometimes that ready to wear clothes on me can look a little long on the torso. Even though I'm quite tall, all the length is in my legs, so a long shirt often just kind of looks like a tunic top on me. So it was really fun to be able to customize it, and I actually think that the 20.5 inch length is like perfect. So I'm definitely going to knit to this length again. And because I was knitting with lots of small balls of yarn, I had to weave in a lot of ends. When I was switching from one colour to another ball of the same colour, I actually learnt how to do a Russian join, which is where you take one end of your yarn, you thread it onto a needle, and then you kind of feed the yarn into itself, so you create a little loop, and then you do the same thing with the other piece of yarn, the new piece, but you join the loops together, so you end up kind of with like the two yarns clasping, and then you pull the loops tight. So it's a pretty invisible join. It's just a bit of a pain to do, but it mostly worked out. There's probably about 5 joins in the main body that you really can't see. Probably the worst one is this one here. So for whatever reason, this one turned out really bulky. So that's kind of an example of what it looks like. But it's pretty secure. Even though this is superwash yarn, I don't feel like it's going to come out. But I just didn't want to have knots in the final project. And I also really am not very good at weaving in ends. It's not that I don't like it. I actually really like Italian bind off and weaving in ends. I just am not good at it. I don't know how to do it properly. I just kind of go wild. So the less that I have to do, the better. But yeah, the Russian join was a cool technique to have learned. I just like to maybe try it with a yarn that's a little bit more rustic or toothy, so maybe it'll hide the mistakes a little bit better. Let me show you the inside. So here's the inside of the jumper. I'm super happy with the colourwork and the floats. I took really great care to make sure that I was not switching the position of the yarns unnecessarily. So I'd have a think about which colour I wanted to be the most dominant, and I would make sure that that yarn was being carried beneath the other one so it had a little bit more loose tension. I did have to do some tension adjustment a couple of times. I was just not paying attention and I got pretty tight, so I had to go back and pull through extra yarn and then flip the jumper inside out and like pull the yarn to the front. It was a bit of a pest. And then I very painstakingly wove in all of these ends, and I wove each one in the opposite direction so there wasn't like too much yarn being drawn in one way. Yeah, I'm really happy with it. The inside kind of betrays how my tension is still not great. There's like a little bit of inconsistency, but it's like 1,000 times better than it was a year ago, so I'm not going to complain too much. But yeah, the weaving in ends and the bind offs probably took me like a day. It wasn't actually that bad. I made sure to carry the yarn from row to row where there wasn't that far to go. So for example, here I used the blue and then I needed it again a few rows later, so I just left it attached. And then I just picked it back up again and made sure that I left a little bit of slack between the rows so it could stretch in blocking. And I think not cutting the yarns every single row did save me quite a bit of weaving in. But again, I don't mind weaving in ends and doing Italian bind off. Controversial opinion, but I really like it. So I think it's kind of fun. And this gives you a better view of the inside of the raglan and then how I went straight into underarms. Just quickly, I forgot to mention earlier, the sweater weighs 330 grams in total. I'll see if I can break that down into how much of each colour. And also, I started knitting it at the beginning of January and I finished it at the beginning of February. So it took me about a month to knit in total. So when it comes to my overall thoughts, I'm so happy with how this turned out. I'm really happy that I challenged myself with circular yoke and the colourwork. I'm really happy with the colours I chose and the final fit. I think this is a great pattern base if you're new to circular yoke and colourwork jumpers and you just want like a really simple, no-nonsense pattern to follow and it's free. So yeah, I really recommend it. There's not a lot of projects for this pattern, and so I think it'd be really great if some more people knit it and use different colour combinations, because it's always really fun to see what people pick. So that's about all I have to say on this sweater. If you have any questions about the pattern, the yarn I used, or the modifications I made, or if there's just something that wasn't clear, please feel free to ask me and I'll do my best to answer. I hope this is really interesting for you. I'm so happy I finished my first full garment of the year and I'm just about to cast on my second one, so stay tuned for that. And I look forward to seeing you guys next time. Bye! The squeakiest floors on planet Earth. Listen to this.